2. Go.
Okay, isn't this fun? The professionals are going to laugh at us, you know, when they see this
No,
thing.
I was doing this 35 years ago, so they
What-
laughed at me too then.
What I'm hoping for, and I'm trying to speak for, you know, the uneducated and the semi-educated vis-a-vis Rod Serling, because I'm coming to this as someone who's not very well educated in Rod Serling stuff, and we're trying to get some enlightenment as to how the local community might have influenced Rod, and what your opinion is as far as the times, what you know about it. I know you're more knowledgeable about Rod Serling's contacts in Hollywood and those influences. Nevertheless, I want to put you on the spot, and just to get your opinion. It's as valid, maybe more valid than many others' opinions, because you've seen aspects of Rod Serling in his life that most of us will never get to see.
All I can say is what I was given first-hand information from Helen Foley, his teacher, from Sybil Goldenberg, former student, with him, and from some of his, local students and wartime buddies. And I can remember one aspect, when his dad had the butcher shop, that the way they increased the business for the butcher shop, they told me Rod was so personable that they would make him go and do 100 deliveries a day because the people wanted to see Rod and talk to Rod, and he got big tips which went back in the coffers for the butcher's shop. So that was one little story. And I guess there's a heavy Jewish influence in the area. I'm not that familiar, being Protestant, but from what I've been told, there is. And so obviously, I don't think he was ashamed of his religion by any means, although I do know later in life he attended the local Unitarian church. I'm sure he didn't give up his group beliefs. I don't know, the whole period seemed to be, from watching movies of that era and talking to people, there was a lot of bigotry back then. Not just towards the Jewish faith, but against all types of peoples. And that had a big influence on his works, as so many of his works are very focused on the Jewish persecution, the Nazis, and one film in particular that I mentioned when we talked last week had some very rough language, where it used inflammatory language that are offensive about every race, and he just rattled on words that you wouldn't expect to be in a 50s TV show. And it probably never aired because of what was in that episode. And I don't recall the title, but it's in the calendar, and I know the print is in the Foundation archives. So we've got to get that. I tell you, it's important work.
It's been hypothesized that the Depression didn't hit very hard in Binghamton, and that therefore it didn't really impact on him. But I know that at the high school they had a group or a club that helped people who were unemployed, and that he was a part of that. What do you know about that? And do you think he was influenced by the economic times? I mean, he must have been very much aware of what was going on around the country. It was a topic of conversation in every household.
I'm sure he was influenced by it. Some of his writings leaned that way. But like I said, they weren't poor. They weren't rich either, but they were a little bit above. And so, I can picture him from his generosity, what we've been told even later in life, that he was a very generous person, even to his detriment. That when they didn't really have, he would still donate and take care of friends and help people. So I can picture him. Helen never mentioned anything as a teacher about that organization to me, so this is new to me. But I can picture, if there indeed was such an organization, that he would have been in there helping.
What did Helen tell you about Rod, either as a student or as a performer or as a writer?
He was not a great student, average student, and that in theater he excelled. She said that when he was on stage he just was mesmerizing as a young man. Looking at the few acting things he did later in life, he certainly lost it if he ever had it, because he's not very good. But there aren't many filmed opportunities to see him acting either. The one in particular where he plays himself, who's to say if it's good or bad, he's himself. And, making the point of censorship and not wanting the actors, and that's the man in the funny suit, the Playhouse 90. very powerful piece, which you do have. So thank God somebody has that to preserve it. Just by way, and I just thought of this after lunch, I'm a fan of all vintage TV, as I mentioned to you. And in the Isle of Lucy set that came out last year with the final 12 playhouses of the hour ones, the episode is a Lucy Desi, where Desi comes out at the end and talks about this episode next week with Rod Serling playing himself and Ed Wynn and the controversy over this whole episode. It's right there in the Lucy set today. So, you know, it's being propagated and promoted, and I doubt if they'll ever release it. There'd be no reason for them to. But it's interesting that that little teaser trailer with Desi and maybe Lucy is still there, and that's, to me, one of the rarest things you ever wrote, and you know, you're fortunate to have it in your archives. And so I thought that was interesting that even in the Isle of Lucy collection now, they're talking about Rod Serling.
Isn't that interesting? I'll have to get a clip of,
I can run that.
So we can see that. What else did Helen Foley say about Rod, especially his writing? There doesn't seem to be much information. I didn't see much mentioned in the biographies. I mean, they allude to Rod being an editor of the newspaper, an editor of one of the literary magazines in high school.
I think it was the newspaper.
What can you tell us about that? And can you tell us anything about his involvement or interest in radio in high school? Was he involved in a local radio station before he came back from the Army?
That I wasn't told anything. The interesting information on his writing creativity did not come from Helen, but I believe it was Vern Hartung, one of his maybe student buddies, but definitely wartime buddies. And he told how Rod only took up writing as a hobby after being severely wounded. And while he was laying there in the hammocks trying to recuperate, he had nothing to do, and that's when he really turned to writing. So that was firsthand to me from somebody that was there.
So Helen Foley's influence on him was as a performer, more as a performer?
I think so from what she said. She said that he didn't excel as a student, and that he did excel on stage. And and ironically, he pursued the theater part for the girls. So she's interjected that even at that young age. You know, he had an eye for the ladies. And I guess being extremely short of stature, you know, he had to do whatever to get their attention, you know.
Pause. Generally speaking, I think that the people who are familiar with some of the influences on Rod Serling, we tend to perceive Helen Foley, his teacher, as also a major creative influence on him and his so-called mentor. Is that the way you understood Helen to represent herself and Rod to represent Helen?
According to Helen, in direct conversations, which there were hundreds of, she said that's represented to her that way all the time, but she didn't see it that way. She said, I don't believe I was a major creative influence on him. He was an average student, did not excel in those writing areas, and that it was in the theater that she was an influence on him, you know, helping him in the theater, which was one of his goals at that point. She didn't understand why all of the fuss either, because she just didn't see herself. She didn't say she wasn't a mentor. They did write a lot, they did correspond a lot, and he did write The Twilight Zone about her, Nightmare as a Child. But again, she told me she didn't see herself fulfilling that role.
And you don't think that it was out of false modesty on her part that she said that?
No, she really didn't believe she was, to me.
I mean, I know of teachers who've influenced me that probably wouldn't agree that they had an influence on me. I have a feeling that Rod's bond to Helen Foley went deeper than just, oh, she helped me with this subject or helped me develop in this area. I think he must have thought of her as a mentor.
Yeah, he must have, for it to come out that way. And he did correspond with her and come to see her often. So
even if her influence was only in that one area of theater, that certainly was exhibited by Rod Serling's excellent sense of production values.
Yes, because you know he did write the best works were the theatrical plays, the Playhouse 90s, not the Twilight Zones. They were theater-orientated pieces done live. Those is where he seemed to shine.
So, and this is not well known to the general public. I mean, the people who study Rod Serling understand this, understand that his best writing and his best theater productions were the earlier productions rather than
Yeah,
Twilight
it seems
Zone,
to be. I
the
mean,
later
he's
productions.
known for the Twilight Zone, obviously, and the generations here now are still fascinated with him. And every time you turn the TV on or go to a movie, you either hear the Twilight Zone theme song or his name or Twilight Zone is part of it. And that amazes me 40, 50 years down the line, these new young people today still know who he is just because of Twilight Zone. And that's why I'm so happy that your goal is to propel the real Rod Serling. I mean, without Rod Serling's creative genius in writing and fighting for censorship, there wouldn't be TV as we know it today. There just would not be. And he doesn't get the credit he deserves. And, you know, he was hated in the industry for bucking the system all the time. But there would be horrible censorship today if it wasn't for Rod's pushing, you know, for the freedom of speech and writing.
How do you rate The Loner compared to Twilight Zone in terms of either theatrical value or writing criteria, creative?
As we've shared,
genius?
it's one of my favorite shows for two reasons. It's Rod Serling, but it's also Lloyd Bridges, who was a very dear friend of mine. And so anything Lloyd did, I archived and enjoyed with the family. So I enjoy from that aspect, but it's a morality play. It's like a lot of the Serling Twilight Zones. They're based on morals. In the pilot, for example, which you've probably never seen, he does a flashback where, as a leader in the Civil War, he runs through a 14 or 15-year-old with a sword, only to find out 5 minutes later the war had ended. And he struggles with that, and that's why he gives up the service, and he goes to find himself. He becomes a loner. He can't cope with murdering that young man. So they were more of a morality play in his writing, and it wasn't until 7, 8, 9 episodes down the line that the producers, William Dozier, came to him and says, "We love the series, but we're only going to pick it up if you put in more violence and more action." And Rod fought them for censorship, says, "You're not going to censor my work. That's not what this series is about. And for me to write them, it has to continue the way it is." And then I'm told from Lloyd Bridges himself that there was a fist fight right there on the set, and that he knocked out cold the producer and walked off the show. So he wrote 15 of the 26 episodes, and the ones that he did not write, which I have some of, you can tell instantly, just like a Twilight Zone. If you're a Serling fan, you know within the first 1 minute that Rod wrote that or he did not write that work. And you can see that in the Loners the same way. They're just fluff and nonsense, the ones that he didn't write.
And was Night Gallery supposed to be some sort of revisiting of themes in the Twilight Zone or the Loner?
Yeah.
Was he trying to resurrect?
That's what Rod wanted to do,
Mm-hmm.
and the studios would not allow him to. And because of his contracts, he was strictly limited to hosting. And other than the first 3 that he wrote, which were great, and brought Steven Spielberg online as his first directorial job with Joan Crawford, it was well written, a great piece. But then the series just went to the bizarre, the horror, the gothic, the occult. And yes, Rod touched on some of those areas, but those weren't his primary morality plays. And so, you know, he did not like night galleries, from what Carol has told me, from what I've read on the series. He just had to fulfill the contract and do it. But on the other hand, it kept him alive. It kept Twilight Zone alive, because here's still Rod Serling. And it kept all the more interest in, I think, Twilight Zones, not so much the earlier works, but at least it helped to propagate his legacy.
Obviously, when Rod switched to his academic career, where he thought he could fulfill some of those drives to write with a sense of moral and social commentary, and that every writer should attack some aspect of their writing in that way, that they almost had a moral imperative, he seemed to suggest in the seminars he gave. But why did he not pursue, or why did someone not pursue producing or reproducing these stories in live theater? How come his stuff never made it to live theater? After all, the earlier productions were live theater. The pre-Twilight
They were a
Zone.
live theater. I don't know what happened. I think it was just being disliked in the industry over censorship, being a fighter all the time and taking on everybody. I mean, he was very outspoken, and if he was writing it or had involvement, it was his way or no way. And not just him, but I mean, a lot of artists in the TV era especially are that way. Even Red Stoughton told me that, you know, nobody's done that at my work, I'll burn it first. So it was the same thing. And the foundation, ironically, to my knowledge, was the first ones that had permission to do 3 plays. It's even in the calendar, it was scheduled, and I was directing The Loner, and Sybil was directing They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar, and Hella was directing her show Nightmare as a Child. And we got in halfway through rehearsals, and I'm not sure just what happened, but it was all brought to a halt.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that would be an appropriate venue to, to continue to perpetuate and even to elevate Ron Serling's reputation?
Oh yeah, I think it's
to
important.
try to get things produced live.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, there's no right way that, to me, they should be doing a Broadway play. I mean, they've done Capote.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what a wonderful work. I didn't see it, but I've seen snippets of it. And Robert Morris won the Emmy for it. There's definitely an interest in Rod and his works out there today. And Twilight Zone would have a big part in that. I think it would be great. And I would like to see the foundation or somebody go back and direct these and do these plays. For example, like you said, they were never done. Twilight Zone was never done as a live play. Neither was The Loner or the Tim Riley's Bar, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with that episode, but that dealt with the tearing down of the Arlington Tea Room. That's what the whole theme was based on, tearing down the Arlington. And it was a great little piece. So, I would love to see those done. I don't care who, we had, a matter of fact, playing the Lloyd Bridges role